So when I was in high school, I was on the wrestling team. And this was a few years ago. Been a minute. Early in my career, the captain was a senior, and he did a great job leading the team. But once he graduated, he came back to help coach, and you could tell that the team still kind of thought of him as like the team captain, but he wasn't. And so one day he kind of pulled me aside and he said, listen, it is your turn to step up and be the leader of the team so that the team can kind of be the best that it can be. And this was a lesson I took to heart. I immediately started to lead differently. I was empowered to step up and be the vocal leader of the team. I tried to be someone that led by example. I would work hard. I would push the others to do their best. I listened to the coach, and if I had to, I would get on to somebody. But I don't think that would have happened if the former captain had not had the conversation and kind of passed the mantle to me, to give me the nudge, to know that his time was over and it was my time to step up. So we'll kind of get back to why I'm bringing that up. But within the book this week, there were several things that stood out. We were in chapters 25 through 27. So some highlights of that include in chapter 25, Nick discussed his interaction with a man by the name of Pastor Chang and a few other pastors that Pastor Chang had discipled. Pastor Chang was 83, and he had just been released from prison 3 days prior to meeting with Nick. He discussed the church planting movement within the Chinese prisons and how from that, the house church movement spread like wildfire. And if you've kept up with the book and you're with us at this point, they talk about that. They talk about how the house churches in China at this time were just spreading, and they were spreading and spreading and spreading. Pastor Chang shared how he intended to live out his days traveling from one house church to another just to bring encouragement and trusting the Lord for provision along the way. Nick talked about how Pastor Chang had lived a hard life, how he had experienced many difficulties, but Chang was said to be the most person full of the Spirit or peace that he has ever met in his life. I mean, those are kind of like big words when you say that this person here has more Spirit, has more of peace than I've ever seen in anyone else. Like that is a high praise. Later in the chapter, Nick goes to a hotel and he interviewed a trio of believers that had been imprisoned and released together. This trio of believers that had led hundreds of prisoners to Christ, they were now out. These three believers had been through a lot, but through the horror of their imprisonment, they used humor to get themselves through. And Nick kind of talked about that. He said when he was in Somaliland, they could tell when someone was about to break. Like if they weren't laughing, if they weren't cracking jokes, if there was no humor to be found, they could tell that they were really almost at their end mentally. So these believers, he noticed they were using a lot of humor to kind of deal with the situation. Nick wrote at the end of the chapter that strength can be found in community and fellowship and faith. And he kind of talked about how those three believers, they had a lot of community amongst each other. They went to prison on the same day. They had served in prison together. They were released on the same day. And they had just stuck with each other to get each other through it. Chapter 26, Nick goes to a public dinner. And this surprised him because everywhere he went, it was very secretive. They used code words like, hey, we're at location 4. We're going to location 17. And that would correspond to a different location. And there was like a whole decipher key that they used. And so it surprised him that they were going to this public restaurant for dinner. At one point, one of the young planters, approximately 25 years old, he schedules an interview with Nick during the dinner. And when this guy went out of earshot, one of the older members says, man, he's great and God's going to do great things through him, but you can't trust him yet because he hasn't been to prison. And that was kind of how they equated, man, how faithful are they? Have they been to prison or have they not? They equated spiritual maturity with the amount of persecution a believer had endured. During the dinner conversation, one of the house church leaders tells Nick, do you know what prison is for us? It is how we get our theological education. Prison in China is for us like seminary in your country. During the dinner, people began to recount story after story of miraculous moves of God that can only be explained as God at work. Chapter 27, Nick arrives to yet another new place in China. He meets new hosts, and it's a whole thing where he's like, I don't know if this is who I'm supposed to meet with. He didn't know these people. He didn't have a name, but it was just how they looked at him. He could tell, okay, I think this is who I'm supposed to be meeting with. He was just trusting his contact. His contact's name was David Chin. At one point, he says, no one in the world knows where he is at, and he says he himself doesn't even know. So when he arrives to this new place, he's looking for the contact, and again, how they looked at him, he's like, I think this is who I'm supposed to be looking for. It was only a guess, and the guy tells him to get into the van. How many of us would do that? Like, how many of us would be like, I don't know a soul here. We don't hardly even speak the same language, and this guy's telling me to get into a van. Would you have the faith to do that? I don't know. I don't know if I would or not. So he gets in the van, and then the driver tells him, sit in the back seat, lay down. You have 18 hours till we get to our next location. 18 hours in the back of the van. Like, that would be tough. And while he's back there, he noticed some very close calls on the trip, like flying and coming within inches of other vehicles, or nearly hitting people crossing the freeway with carts. Crazy stuff. So a little fun fact about me is I'm the oldest of 5. I have 3 adopted siblings. 2 are from Korea and 1 is from China. And I remember when my mom went to China, she had to actually go there to bring my sister back. And I remember her telling stories and sharing pictures, and it was like guys on bicycles, and they would have like 6-7 mattresses strapped onto the back of this bicycle. Or they would have these water jugs. Like, it was just all sorts of crazy things. And so when he talked about there was a person with a cart, that's kind of what it brought my mind back to. Halfway through their journey, they stop at a rural 2-story home. He said it was the nicest house that he has been in during his entire visit to China. He goes to bed. He decides to wake up early in the morning, so he didn't mess with anyone or didn't leave anybody waiting on him. So he goes to bed, and he goes downstairs. When he comes downstairs, there was a government military official at the table. Nick says that the government military official, he doesn't even act like Nick is in the room. Like, he doesn't even see him. Like, he's invisible. They don't speak at all. Again, it was as if Nick was invisible or did not exist. When the guy later leaves, he asked his companions why that happened. And they said, well, because he's such a high-ranking official, no one would suspect him of being so high up within the military of being a Christian. And they said he stared through you and didn't act like he saw you, so that if he gets questioned, he would never have to say he saw a Westerner in his house. He could say, no, I never saw one. Plausible deniability. Isn't that what they call it, Trent?
Yeah.
So they continued on their journey. They finally arrived. It was going to be a Bible conference with all these different pastors and church planners, and they're way out in rural China in this gated compound. Nick gets up to speak. He's completely exhausted. He tells them a little bit about his story. And they ask if there are believers of Jesus in other countries. Like, they ask the question, are we the only people in the world who believe about Jesus here in China? And he tells them no, like, there's believers all over the world. There's believers in all parts of the world. And listen, they have been praying for you. They have been praying for you in China as the persecuted church. He then tells them about the persecution of other believers in Islamic countries. The Chinese believers become incredibly silent and quiet. Nick, at this point, he's exhausted. He says, I'm going to bed. He wakes up in the morning to the sound of screaming and shouting, and he thinks the Chinese police have come to round them up. What he finds out, though, is that they were pleading to the Lord for these Islamic believers. Their brothers and sisters that were being persecuted. These Chinese believers had determined to get up an hour earlier each day to pray and plead for these Christians. And it definitely begs the question, are we praying and pleading for the persecuted church around the world? Do we care that our brothers and sisters in Islamic countries, in China, in North Korea, are being persecuted for the name of Christ? And are we praying for them? So that was kind of our summary. So at the beginning of the study, I told you how I was a high school wrestler. And the mantle of leadership was passed from the previous captain to me. When it did, I knew it was my time to step up and lead the team. And the reason that I bring all this up is because in the middle of all these chapters, it wasn't the stories of persecution that stood out the most to me. There was persecution, but what stood out most to me was the idea of the mantle of discipleship. They talked about how prisons in China were their theological training ground. Nick drove 18 hours for this Bible conference with these Chinese believers. But the story that stood out most to me was the testimony and story of Pastor Chang. Nick, he writes, it seemed like Pastor Chang had lived through it all. Like the Apostle Paul, he learned to be content regardless of the circumstances, inside prison or outside of prison. He preached the same gospel message and discipled anyone interested in becoming a follower of Jesus. Pastor Chang, like the Apostle Paul, was like the Apostle Paul in another way. He devoted his life to mentoring and training younger believers, just as the Apostle Paul had done with young Timothy. Indeed, the 6 other men in the apartment with us, ranging in age from their 20s to their 40s, were Pastor Chang's Timothy. Many had led to Christ and mentored over the years. Pastor Chang's joy was obvious as he talked about his own faith journey and celebrated the way that his life intersected with the lives of these men. For 2 days, I listened as Pastor Chang quietly recounted story after story of God's faithfulness, protection, and provision. What struck me most about Pastor Chang, even more than the details of his remarkable life, was his demeanor over the following days as he listened to me interview his spiritual proteges. As the younger men shared their testimonies, the old man squatted in the corner of the room. He closed his eyes and he listened. From time to time, I noticed that he was humming what sounded like praise songs, even though I could tell he was still listening intently. Over and over again, he smiled in satisfaction and nodded with pride and approval at the points his young friends were making in their stories. Pastor Chang, he was all about raising up the next generation. He was about making disciples. He was 83 years old, and he knew that for the house church movement to continue, he had to invest and raise up more leaders. Pastor Chang was a disciple maker. Time and time again in these 3 chapters, the theme of discipleship stood out to me. So tonight, I kind of wanted to focus on this idea, this concept of the mantle of discipleship. So we're all called to make disciples. We're all called to pour into believers who may be younger than us in age, or maybe they're not as spiritually far along in their walk as we are. Or maybe they have no spiritual walk at all. Making disciples involves evangelism as well. We cannot separate the two. But making disciples involves training up someone in the way that they should go and having them become like Christ. It is about finding someone who can be raised up, and then they will in turn make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. We have to be a church that is building up and raising up disciples. The book compares Pastor Chang to Paul and his younger pastor friends as Timothy. But today, I wanted to look at the discipleship journey that takes place between Elijah and Elisha in their lives. Elijah was the prophet who faced Ahab and Jezebel. He was the prophet who predicted a drought during the reign of Ahab. He was the one who went to the widow in Zarephath and made the jug of oil last through the power of the Lord. He was the prophet who raised the widow's son. He was the one who called fire down from heaven on the altar. He was a powerful prophet. And one day he sees a young man named Elisha. And I wanted to show how Elijah discipled and raised up Elisha to be the man of God that God was calling him to be, to take the message forward. I want to show how we can use that same approach for discipleship in our lives. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 19. And we're going to begin in verse number 19. 1 Kings 19, verse 19, it says, "So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, 'Let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you.' And he said to him, 'Go back, for what I have done to you.' And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him." So what we see here is a chosen call and an obedient response. The first part of discipleship is to select one or a few people to disciple. Like it starts with actually seeking out people to pour into, to point to the Lord. Here, Elijah, he takes his cloak and he throws it over Elisha. This was the sign that he had been chosen to follow the prophet. The first part of discipleship is opening your eyes, seeing that someone is ready and open to be discipled, that someone is wanting to grow, that someone is seeking. Sometimes they might be as lost as can be, and you're just going to do what you can to walk alongside them and disciple them to help them to see their need for Christ. So I would ask you, who in your life is your Elisha that you can be an Elijah to? That you can wrap your cloak around, that you can show what it means to follow after the Lord. I think about Pastor Chang in the text, and he literally just found some guys in prison. Like he's in this prison, and he's like, all right, I'm just going to go share the gospel. And he shares the gospel, and he begins to pour into these 6 men. And he pours into them, and he pours into them. And he raises them up to be pastors in the Chinese house church movement. He loved on them. He poured his life into them. What I think we do sometimes is we overthink discipleship. We overthink evangelism. And I think we make it far too difficult than it needs to be. We think we have to say the right words. We think we have to get this magic formula just perfectly right. But discipleship is literally doing life with someone and pointing them closer to Jesus, helping them to grow in their walk with the Lord. Pastor Chang just had these guys in prison, and he just did life with them. So I would ask, has anyone discipled you? Have you ever been discipled? Has anyone just done life with you and put their cloak around you and help you to walk towards Jesus? And if you haven't, you're probably not alone, honestly. I think a major flaw in the American church is that we don't do discipleship well. I think a lot of times we'll put people in Sunday school classes, and those are great. They have their place, and we call it discipleship. And they may have some educational training, and it might be of some value, but real discipleship involves getting deep and peeling back the layers that we put up to guard our hearts. I think many Christians have not been effectively discipled in our culture. And what we do is we equate knowledge to discipleship. We equate, well, I know all this stuff, so I've been discipled. But have you experienced more of Jesus? For me, this happened in college, which I'd been a Christian at that point for several years. So it took many years before someone walked alongside me and discipled me. It started as a Bible study through Romans. It was with the Baptist campus ministry on Murray's campus. And that was great. It had its place. But the real discipleship happened when we would just hang out in the dining hall, me and the Bible study leader. Or he'd be like, hey, let's just go get in my truck. Let's just drive around. And we would just get in the truck, and we would talk about life. We would sometimes talk about the Bible. We would talk about this question that I was wrestling with. We would talk about following Jesus. And if I had not had an Elijah or a Pastor Chang-like figure to help me grow in my walk, I'm not sure where I would be today. While there was formal Bible study, the real growth happened with that kind of like, let's get in the truck mentality of discipleship. So what I would say to you is don't overthink it. Look around and see who in your life the Lord is leading you to disciple. It could be formal, like through weekly or regular meetings, where, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to get breakfast, we're going to open God's Word, we're going to talk about God's Word, we're going to do the Hear Journals together, we're going to walk through the Insanity of God book, and we're going to talk through it before Tuesday night, something like that. It could be formal, or it could be as simple as periodic discussions at work, where you just talk about Jesus with somebody that you work with regularly, where you just point them closer to Christ, where you just pour into them just a little bit as you're getting a cup of coffee, or as you're warming your lunch up at the microwave. We're all called to make disciples. Matthew 28, the Great Commission, tells us, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. It's what Jesus' followers are expected to do. So I would ask you, who are you discipling? Sometimes you'll have long-term discipleship relationships where you pour into someone for a few years. Other times it might be for a few months. But the question is, who are you discipling? And again, Elisha, he had to answer that call. He had to say, yep, I want this. Because I've had people that I have tried to disciple, and I have tried to, hey, get into your word. Make sure, try to pray. Let's study the word together. And we would come together and there would be no reading. And it's like, how do you make disciples of someone who doesn't want to be discipled? So I think the other part is they have to answer that call of, yes, I want more. Just like Elisha did here. So what we notice next is that the mantle is passed. This one is found in 2 Kings 2, verses 1 through 14. And we'll see where Elijah kind of passes the mantle on to Elisha. 2 Kings 2, verse 1. Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." And Elisha said to him, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" And he said, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives, as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The sons of the prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the sons of the prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his cloak and rolled it up and struck the water. And the water was parted to the one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." And he said, "You have asked for a hard thing. If you see me, as I am being taken away from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." And as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it and cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen." And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them into two pieces. He took up the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. So what we see here is that the mantle is passed. Elijah is taken up in the whirlwind, and the mantle in this moment is passed to Elisha. At some point in the discipleship journey, the disciple has to be sent out on their own. And this is what happens with Elisha. It's why Pastor Chang was standing in the corner, and he was giving approval over the men that he had discipled. Elisha takes on Elijah's mantle. Elijah is taken up, and Elisha picks up the coat and is sent to walk as Elijah walked and do as Elijah did for the Lord. Now, we're not to be discipling people to be us, but we're discipling them to be more like Christ. So when they are commissioned and sent out on their way to make more disciples, they can disciple them to be like Christ as well. There comes a point when the disciple must go on their own and serve the Lord themselves with the goal of making more disciples. Discipleship must be replicable. And it's the multiplication effect rather than addition. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I meant to look it up, but Robbie Gallaty, he has a great book talking about discipleship. I know Jesse and I have talked about it. But he talks about how if someone in a year went out and they preached the gospel and 600 people were saved. I mean, that's great, right? Like 600 people being saved in a year is awesome. But what Robbie does is he shows, okay, if I go out and make 2 disciples, and those 2 make 2 disciples each, and then they make 2 disciples and 2 disciples and on and on and on, it's the multiplication effect. And he talks about how within a couple years, the whole world would know Christ. If we would just have the multiplication mindset instead of addition mindset. And that takes this idea of taking on the mantle. right? Taking on that next step, like knowing, okay, I have learned everything I can learn from you. Now it's time for me to go and do. That's part of discipleship. It's the going and doing. Like we can sit and we can listen under someone. We can absorb. We can, talk to them about different things. We can study the word with them. But at some point, the mantle of discipleship has to pass. And it has to go from sitting and listening to going and doing. And again, I think I talked about how discipleship is missed sometimes in the American church. I think that's a piece that's missed. A lot of times we want to sit and listen, but we don't want to go and do. Maybe that's out of fear. Maybe it's out of, you don't know enough. I don't know. But I think something that we have to do better in the American church, that I want Crossview to do better, is the going and doing. I want us to go and make disciples, and then I want that next disciple to go and do. And that means to make more disciples. So we want to see multiplication. So the mantle is passed here. And then what we see going into 2 Kings 4, just kind of highlighting a few things here, we see that the disciple begins to function by himself. So what we see is that Elisha begins to do as Elijah did. What we see is he restores the widow's oil. We also see that he raises the Shunammite's son. We see that he purifies the deadly stew. So what we're seeing is that Elisha is doing a lot of what Elijah did. And these two guys are doing incredible miracles for the Lord. And maybe the Lord would use some of us in those same ways. I'm not sure. But again, part of functioning by yourself is that you do what the Lord calls you to do. This could be in service to the church. It could be being the hands and feet of Christ in the community. It could be helping a neighbor, starting a nonprofit, going on a mission trip, becoming a kids leader, joining a cross-life group. A functional disciple of Christ is obedient to the Lord and follows his call in their life, even when it means it might cost their life. Like look at Pastor Chang that we read about this week. He followed Jesus. He led people to Jesus, even when it cost him his freedom, even when he was in prison, even when everything else was taken away, even when the authorities did not want him to. He shared the gospel. He did what God called him to do. So what is the Lord calling you to do? What is God leading you to do in your life? And I would just say, do whatever he is calling you to do. Take that next step of obedience, whatever that is. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 11. What we see is that the disciple begins to disciple others. 6:11. And the mind of the king of Syria was greatly troubled because of this thing. And he called his servants and said to them, will you not show me who of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. And he said, go and see where he is at, that I may send and seize him. It was told, behold, he is in Dothan. So he sent there horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, alas, my master, what shall we do? He, this was Elisha, said, do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And when the Syrians came down against him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, please strike this people with blindness. So he struck them with blindness in accordance with the prayer of Elisha. And Elisha said to them, this is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. And he led them to Samaria. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha said, O Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see. So the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. So now Elisha has someone helping him like he had helped Elijah. He has a disciple. He is showing him all that God is calling him to do. He is taking him with him as he is going and doing ministry. He is praying for him. as Elijah had discipled him, so he is now discipling this person. That is the call of discipleship. Again, it's replicable, it's multiplication, it's the commissioning of someone to go, and it must lead to more disciples. The church is only the current generation away from ceasing to exist. If we fail to make disciples, fail to raise the next generation of believers, that's it. Like the church only exists for the current generation of believers right now. Discipleship involves raising up others who now make their own disciples without you. The way it works is that you pour into and disciple someone for a period of time. You send them out. They go and disciple someone else for a period of time, and then they send them out. And that person does the same thing, and so on and so on. And what we have done oftentimes, I think, is we have separated evangelism and discipleship. We think they are two separate tasks, when in reality they are one. We have separated them. We put a lot of emphasis on evangelism, and we should. We should put an emphasis on evangelism, going and sharing the gospel. But I think we have neglected to make disciples. We think, oh, someone else will teach them. Church, we can't separate the two. They are one and the same, and the call of Jesus' followers is to go and make disciples. Pastor Chang is an incredible example of a disciple maker. And I would ask, are you ready to do that as well? Elisha, he prays here, oh Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. Do you have someone you're praying for that you're saying, open their eyes, open their heart to what you have for them, Lord? He prays, and then the eyes of his servant were open, and he sees that the mountain is full of the Lord's army. He sees what Elisha is talking about. Do you have someone that you're praying for, that you're discipling, that you're like, Lord, open their hearts so that they may see your goodness, that they may see, Lord, that you're above everything else? Church, it's really and truly all about discipleship. Everything we do has to be about growing in our walk, helping others to grow in our walk, and leading people to know the truth of the gospel.